Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars is a very interesting book, and it's about how to control humanity through subversion and the use of banking in order to essentially enslave them in a digital control state and then walk them into genocide. So this is a basically a manual that was apparently found by a gentleman who bought a Xerox printer from a secondhand equipment, sort of industrial equipment sale in the 1980s. And he found this stuck inside of it. And the introduction of this book talks about how this methodology for societal manipulation was essentially an outgrowth of what they called operations research that developed during World War II. And in World War II, they were trying to put together a science around the idea of how do you get the most effective and efficient behavior from large groups of people. This is obviously very important because they had millions of men in uniform doing very complex tasks on a very large scale. After World War II, this got sort of brought into more of a formal discipline and was worked on very heavily by the U.S. Air Force, Harvard, and a number of other sort of elite institutions. And this is all sort of discussed in the very beginning of this book as sort of a background to why they're writing this. The book also then goes on to say that in the early 1950s, I believe it was 1954, which also happens to be, I believe, the first year of the Bilderberg meetings, that a group of, quote, global elites were convened, and this whole methodology was proposed to them. And they voted to declare what they call the Quiet War using these silent weapons, which were the outgrowth of the operations research, against the people, the common people, all sort of with the intent of moving us into a digital slave state and then depopulation. So I'll go through this and just in a quick summary, but it's very interesting material. It's a very short read. I recommend reading this on your own, less than 100 pages. A lot of very technical diagrams in there, but you can sort of skip over those and it'll still make plenty of sense. And you can get it on Amazon. All right, so it opens up with basically a statement that doesn't leave a whole lot of doubt as to what these guys are all about. They say, it is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or automation of society without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, i.e. slavery and genocide. So explicitly, to kick off this introduction to how to control and manipulate society, these guys say, we're going to have to, enslave and kill millions of people. It's just what has to happen. So it sets the stage pretty well for what's to come. They also go on to describe what a silent weapon is. And the idea here is that it's the same concept as a kinetic weapon. So, like a firearm, which has the intent of destroying the target, of eliminating a target. In this case, the target is most of the human population. So it's on a much grander scale. But unlike a standard kinetic weapon, this is also going to sort of form. It works a little bit differently. It's going to be more complex, and obviously it's got to be silent so that humanity doesn't realize what's being done to it. So this book's description is that regarding a silent weapon, it shoots situations instead of bullets, propelled by data processing instead of chemical reaction, explosion, originating from bits of data instead of grains of gunpowder, from a computer instead of a gun, operated by a computer programmer instead of a marksman, under the orders of a banking magnate instead of a military general. So they're telling you the idea here is to destroy the target. The target's the people. As I said, they want to automate and genocide you. So this is just the difference. It's the same thing, different mechanisms. Now, they quote this gentleman, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who was an early member of the Rothschild banking dynasty, who I'm sure you're familiar with. And he was quoted as saying, "Give me control over a nation's currency, and I care not who makes its laws." So this is sort of the whole concept of central banking. I mean, if you can create money out of thin air you can get people to do pretty much anything you want. You can put people in debt, and you can take their property by calling in that debt. You can bribe whomever you want just by printing the money out of thin air and getting them to do whatever it is you need them to do. If you can control the money, it doesn't really matter who makes laws because they're not going to be enforced against you. You have all the money. So they really like this guy, Mayor Amschel Rothschild, because they credit him with coming up with the idea of basically controlling society through the subtle mechanism of fiat currency. So the way they describe it is that he would basically issue these IOUs, just bits of paper, in exchange for collateral. So people would put up, their own property, their farms, their gold, their homes, whatever, their factories, in exchange for a loan, because they would want to make more money, and he would induce them with more money, and they refer to money as an induction sort of property, like it gets shit moving. So they induce these people with paper, just useless paper. They're paid back in more useless paper if they do pay back their loans, which they can just loan out again. And if they don't pay them back, then they take their real wealth. And the way this is also described in the book is that there's purposeful cycles of boom and bust, where there'll be a bunch of easy money, so they'll lend out tons of capital for a long time and just like let people take out loans and invest and buy more property and improve property and all this shit. And then they'll tighten credit, and it'll cause a recession. So you see this with the Federal Reserve, where they will have very low interest rates, and then you get this long cycle like it was from 2008 until, I don't know, like 2022, where it's just economic growth just by just pushing money into the system. And then they can just tighten it up, and you tighten up the credit, you bring up interest rates, you make it harder to borrow, and the economy slows down, and then people can't pay their loans back, and you take their real property. And if you do this over and over and over again, you end up generating, or you end up capturing all the real wealth, all the not useless paper, like the factories, the farms, the homes. And this is a very manipulative way of dominating society, and they fucking love it. All right, they do understand that there are limits to this, and that physically they can't just keep printing useless money forever without any consequences. They realize it's useless, and they liken this to like sort of a electronic engineering. Like they see this as the same thing as engineering electronics, almost exactly so. So they're very aware of the physical impossibility of doing this forever and never, paying the piper. So they say this could all be settled one way or the other once you reach the point, like the breaking point of too much fake money out there and the whole system running on it. They say people can self-regulate, and by this they mean people will tamp down their own greed, they'll limit their ambitions, they'll be happy with what they have, they'll sort of settle for stagnation, economically at least. But they say this is not going to happen. It's impossible. People aren't going to do it. It's beyond human nature. So they say the other two options that there are, other than self-regulation, are catastrophic war, or, and they don't like this idea because remember, this was presumably written in the mid 20th century, so they were aware of the atomic bomb. They were very fearful of nuclear warfare. They don't want to die, right? Like they don't want to be, they don't want to be part of this. So it could end in catastrophic war where they might be injured, or they can digitally enslave the world and march them into an orderly genocide. So they obviously chose this. And they see themselves, I'll get into it, but they obviously chose in their way of thinking for it to be better that we're all enslaved and then killed off before the whole system collapses in on itself and they're sort of held to account. All right, so now they explain, why they think, this is sort of their thinking, their rationale behind this, given this this line of thinking, this logic. And they say, it is left to those few who are truly willing to think and survive as the fittest to survive, to solve the problem for themselves as the few who really care. Otherwise, exposure of the silent weapon would destroy our only hope of preserving the seed of future true humanity. Now, they're talking about this in the context of like, this must be totally secret. Nobody can know about it because they're saying they're very Darwinian. So they say somebody's going to survive this catastrophe, and these people are very likely involved in the same sort of occult circles that the elite today are. where they believe in cyclical time, which may not be wrong, but they also believe that human civilization goes in cycles. So maybe Atlantis was in a previous cycle, ended by catastrophe, perhaps like Noah's flood, followed by our current epoch, which they believe will also end in catastrophe. And they think we're at the end of that, and they want to be that remnant breakaway civilization that survives. And they say, in their thinking, like this could either end by catastrophe, sort of like it did last time, or they can control it, and they could go on into a new golden age as the transhumanist priest robot leaders, or whatever. And so that's why they're choosing to do this. All right, now they look at economics and electronics as having absolutely identical laws, to the point where they say, when keeping the secret, you don't even need to discuss social control through economics whatsoever. All you need to do is understand the principles of electronic engineering, and you can manipulate the society in any way you want to. Now, this doesn't take into account sort of other institutions within society that matter, other than economic institutions, but they'll get to that. So what they say they need, and basically what they can do with it here in this context, is they need tons of data. They need to collect as much data as humanly possible, so they can know everything that's going on, and so that they can do what they call shock testing. And what they mean by shock testing is that they will take parts of the economy and shock them. So let's say they block a canal and disrupt the flow of certain goods. They shut down ports. They lock down areas of people, and they can't produce, or they can't operate ports and ship things or import things. Or they, let's say, cause a labor strike so that people aren't working. So they cause these different shocks throughout the economy, and then if they have enough data, they can tell exactly what it does to other parts of the economy. So if they do this enough with enough data, they say that the human economy and society at large is completely and totally predictable. And then if you have enough power to cause these sort of shocks, it can be totally manipulated. So if they know everything and they can harm specific bits of the economy, they can drive people into whatever direction they want to drive them. Now, they say their main strategy for getting here, to getting to the point where that you are totally enslaved to their economic machinations, is to manufacture consent through the diversion of the masses. And this is like bread and circuses. So they just basically want to degrade humanity to the point where they are not paying attention, where they're so just morally decrepit, so bankrupt of any kind of spirituality or attachment to higher purpose, that they can just have a string dangled in front of them, and they can just be manipulated through economic desires that they control. And they have sort of a list here they describe of the way things will play out as they pull certain levers. And we could zoom in here, I think, to look at just an example of what some of these are. So they say, they start off with, they can allocate opportunities, which destroys opportunities, which controls the economic environment, which controls the availability of raw materials, which controls capital, which controls bank rates, which controls the inflation of the currency, which controls the possession of property, which controls industrial capacity, controls manufacturing, and so on and so on and so on. And at the end of it, they're talking about controls health options, preys on weaknesses, cripples strengths, leeches wealth and substance. So, this is all sort of in line with a just very predatory way of thinking. And when you read sort of the way they write all of the prose in this book, it's a mindset that, even if it seems incredible, I can't vouch for the total veracity of this, but this was written at the very latest in the 80s when it was found, and all this stuff has kind of come to pass as they said it has. But if you read the way they wrote this, they are showing you a mentality of just absolute, they're very practical and predatory. They're not inhibited by morality or emotions or anything like that. They're not sentimental people. So they have this final table here of strategies they can use to produce specific outcomes. And these will sound familiar to you. because they're very much front and center sort of now. So let's zoom in on that, and I'll just read through a few of these. So one, they say basically keep the public ignorant in order to have less public organization. So if the people don't know what you're doing, if they have no idea what's going on to control them, they're not going to organize against you. They're not going to have protests. They're not going to go on strike. Things like that. They need access to control points, like prices and sales, and this is required to have a reaction to outputs for feedback. So they need to be able to understand like what price points people are buying at and how much is being bought as they go through this. They need that information. They need to, it says, create preoccupation to lower defenses. So people are preoccupied with like what some Instagram celebrity is doing or whatever. They're watching football. It's like the bread and circuses. So they just want you preoccupied with some dumb shit, and you aren't going to notice what they're doing, like from a tax perspective, what they're doing from a data collection perspective, or what sort of restrictions they're putting on your freedoms. They say attack the family unit. This is very interesting. They say control the education of the young. So they want to attack the family because the family provides a worldview for children, and they go in depth into this in the book as well. What they want to do is make sure that your family is not providing you with like a moral code, a certain way of viewing the world, of perceiving anything. They want to control every bit of your perception about what's going on around you so that they can control you. And they go into depth about how they want this to start in preschool. They don't want any influence from the family, as little as possible. And if we remember during the Bush administration, that whole No Child Left Behind push, like that was very focused on getting little toddlers into public preschools. It goes right along with this. If you remember Black Lives Matter, they were, one of their stated goals on their website before they scrubbed it was to destroy the nuclear family. Because if you don't have the family involved in shaping and forming children, then that defaults to the state. So they say, give people less cash and more credit and doles. So they say this will cause people to be more self-indulgent, and it'll allow the elite to collect more data. So if you have the ability to buy things you can't afford, like on a credit card, then you're just going to buy more shit. You're going to be more self-indulgent. You're going to get yourself more into debt, and you could be enslaved that way. And you're also just producing more data because you're using credit cards. So you're automating data collection for these people. And today, even more so, because you're buying on Amazon or whatever, or using Venmo or Cash App, whatever it is, you're providing near perfect data on what you're buying and how much of it you're buying and like your spending habits. And this is what they need to be able to have complete predictability, like they say they want. Attack the privacy of the church. They don't want that to be a substitute for government in any way. They want to be the ultimate authority. And they want to enforce social conformity because they say this will create computer programming simplicity. And by that, they mean if you are just a herd animal and you will do whatever everybody else is doing, just put on the mask, take your shoes off, do medical procedures, whatever, make your hair pink. Like you're just gonna be very easy to steer. And social media helps a lot with this because people just jump onto whatever the cool trend is, and then that trend can be changed at will. And this is also something that Saul Alinsky talks about in Rules for Radicals, where he talks about just getting people mobilized for anything, and then they could be used as a mobilized force for anything else. So they just want you all going in the same direction like sheep, that one little harmless sheepdog can push around in whatever direction it feels like moving him. And they say minimize the tax protests. This is going to maximize economic data because they'll be collecting data on how much you pay in taxes, and it'll make minimum enforcement problems. Then they also talk about some other things here. I'll skip a few. They want to establish boundary conditions for problem simplicity and solution of differential and difference equations. So that's a little bit complicated, but what they're saying, if you read this book, is they want to establish like the boundaries of thought, the boundaries of acceptable discussion. And this plays a lot into censorship. They want to be able to put a box around you and what you think is possible. They don't want you to perceive anything outside of a narrow band of ideas as being physically or conceivably possible, because that makes it much easier for them to control you. You can't think outside the box, literally. And then they talk about things like collapsing the currency. This is the last one here. And that's very interesting because collapsing the currency is what they say is a way to destroy faith of the American people in each other. And this makes sense when you think about what currency is. And I'm not talking about the fiat version, like the way that this Rothschild guy is saying we're going to manipulate society, but just the means of trading with other people without having to barter. Like if you have something that's universally accepted as valuable, like the dollar, you can trade your dollars for whatever it is you want or need. And that reduces the amount of conflict you have with other people, because it makes it possible for you to get stuff you need without having to like kill them and rob them or raid their farm or whatever, or find like something that they need. Like if they don't need a cow and all you have is a cow, like you can't get their eggs, their chickens, right? Because they don't want your cow, they have a cow. But if you have money, you could buy their eggs. So it limits conflict, it reduces conflict, it facilitates trade and cooperation. And if it's a sound currency like gold or silver, or possibly Bitcoin or whatever, if it's not something that's just being used for manipulation like fiat currency is, then it really does a huge amount. It's one of the greatest advancements in human history as far as limiting conflict. So collapsing the currency makes it basically impossible for you to interact with other people in a peaceful way. And just imagine how that might work if they get their CBDCs in place, their central bank digital currencies, and their social credit scores. If they decide to cut you out of the system, you have no way of interacting with anybody if you're cut off from your CBDCs. If CBDCs are the currency of use and you can't use them, then nobody has any faith in you. You don't have any faith in anybody else. You can't be, you are totally controllable because you can't peacefully interact with others to get the things you need. So this is just a list, and the formatting here is going to be weird, so I'll pull it back out. I would screenshot that because it's very interesting and it tells you what they're doing. And again, I cannot vouch for the veracity of the author or the information or whatever, or the backstory, but this stuff is all played out. It's very prescient in terms of what sort of things the elite might do to shock test the data collection portion, the focus on education. And if you use this as sort of a lens to view current events through, you can very, very easily see how a lot of things that otherwise don't make sense suddenly come together. Because this is about creating a control state, a absolute matrix of total and absolute digital enslavement so that they can walk you into genocide, all for the purpose of depopulating the world before their economic system of fiat currency collapses and endangers them. So that's the plan, and it's plausible to me. All right, I hope you like this. If you found this interesting, please subscribe, share, and follow me on Locals as well. I can speak about much less censored things there. It's all free right now. In the future, I may do like some paid like special events or whatever, but all this information is free there. I'm also on Odyssey and Rumble. And thanks for watching.